All right, Raquel, thank you for agreeing to meet with me, speak with me today. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking with Raquel Blackwell. She is no stranger to the virtual environment, having worked, really, you worked as a remote employee for several years, right?
Yes, about 8 years. Actually, I started a proprietary site for my company. I was one of the first three leaders to start that, and so we got to move into that virtual space. And I was there for about 7 or 8 years before I went back into a building.
Okay, so you went back into a building, and then here in the last few months, like the rest of the world, you were sent away from that building. So,
Yes.
um, tell me a little bit about, because I think all of us right now are adjusting to the virtual tools and trying to become, at least comfortable, and then secondly,
Mhm.
efficient. So, what have you learned that allows you to be very? Because I've seen you teach virtually, and it's very engaging. So, what have you learned about how to be proficient in that virtual teaching and virtual learning space?
Okay. So a couple of things, three to be exact, come to mind, Daniel, with that question. When I think about virtual training or virtual classes versus your brick and mortar sessions, there are three things that stand out that I would have to attribute to my sessions being successful virtually. The first one is virtual engagement. So there are different things that we have to go about doing to acquire and to keep that engagement with a virtual setting. So the first thing is always use webcams, always, always. And I try to make light of it with them. So I make sure that they know that they're going to be on webcam because nobody wants to be a surprise, turn on your camera. So I make sure that's stressed in various ways. It's in the invite, it's in the initial email. I remind them when we get on. I say, okay, we're going to get started. We're waiting on Jane to get on webcam. So just make sure that everybody's on webcam.
So
The
you
next
expect all of your participants to be on camera to be successful.
100%, they have to be on webcam. Yes, yes. Another thing is asking open-ended questions, more open-ended questions, because that's going to get more information from people, which will in turn get them to be more engaged. So I like to ask more open-ended questions, and I like to stay away from the closed-ended questions when I'm in the virtual environment. Now, this is a good tip to do in regular sessions also, but in regular sessions you can get away with asking some closed-ended questions but keeping that engagement, not so much so with the virtual sessions. The other thing I like to do is I like to call people by name. And what I mean by that is if I'm going to ask a question, sometimes I'll ask it and follow it up with a name. Right. And so what that does is if you do have some people in there that are trying to multitask or not really paying attention, you're going to catch them off guard just one time. But once they see that that's what you're doing, then they know, oh, I got to pay attention. I don't know when Raquel is going to call on me and I need to be prepared. So I like to do it for that reason. The other reason I like to do it for is you've done a lot of sessions. So you know that in each session, you're going to have some people that are talkers and some people that are not. And so you want to make sure that your talkers don't overshadow everyone else and take over your virtual class. And so that's a good way that I have found that I can kind of influence that by calling on people purposely. Now I don't do it every time, but more times than not I do. And then sometimes I'll just open it up for the floor.
Yeah, the class that I observed you teach, I noticed that right away that you were calling on people by name, and it just, they immediately knew what the expectation was for participation. But to your second point, it fosters an inclusive environment where those who
Yes.
want to talk are regulated, if you will, and those who are not as inclined still have the opportunity to participate.
Yes, absolutely. Another one that helps is so I have three. So that was engagement. I want to talk
Yeah.
about preparation.
Okay.
And I don't want anyone to think, well, I prepare for all of my classes. I know you do. But when I say for virtual preparation, it's a little bit different because when you're in the building and you have your activities, right, your exercises, whether it's going to be two pairs or three, a group of three, a group of five, or whatever, you can easily divide people up, right, because they're sitting amongst themselves.
Sure, yeah.
The virtual environment is not like that. So what I do is I look at the roster and I go ahead and whether it's a 4-hour class, an 8-hour class, or whatever it is, I know how long the class is going to be. And of course, that's going to determine what exercises and activities that I do in the TRP workbook. And then based on those activities and how they're paired up, I look at my roster and I go ahead and I pair everybody up for each activity, so that when we get to that activity, I'm either going to present a whiteboard that shows who you're buddied up with, or I'll put it in the comments that shows who you're buddied up with. They already know how to go out and get with their buddy, because it takes a little bit more time to reach that point where you're able to talk to just you and your buddy, and you want to make sure that you preserve as much time as possible and that every time that you have them is productive. And the other thing it does when you're not prepared in that way is you lose credibility. And that's going to hinder the engagement, right? So if I'm sitting in a class and Raquel isn't ready and I got to wait 15 minutes before we can buddy up, you've kind of lost my engagement now. So it's going to help with that also.
So there's a real flow to it. You're prepared. It looks to them seamless.
Absolutely.
That gives you credibility, gives the course credibility, and keeps them highly engaged. That's great.
Absolutely. The last one is going to be setting the stage. And again, I know we do this anyway, but there's some things that we need to be a little bit more clear about when we're in the virtual environment, or think a little bit differently when we're in the virtual environment. So for example, you want to be clear with them as far as when the exercises and the activities are over, you're giving them a set amount of time. They need to come back with that time, on that time frame, so that we can continue, because you're not in the building where you can say, okay, wrap it up, come on back, everybody come back to your table. You're literally waiting on people to come back to the phone. So you got to stress the importance of that. Also, what I do is I tell people, put your cell phones on mute, and I lead by example, right? Before the class starts. Okay, guys, everybody, let's get your cell phones out. I'm going to turn it off and I'm going to put it all the way over there, because I don't want it to disturb me. So I don't want them to feel like they're in trouble and I'm punishing them and taking away their cell phone. I want them to feel like it's a privilege, because it is. And so what I say to them is something like this. I want you guys to think about this. Your company or your employer is paying for you to be away from your day-to-day job and take a session or a course that will help you more in your everyday life.
Yeah. There you go. I'm glad we're recording this, because see, I can play that at the beginning of my classes now.
You got to take advantage of that. And we shortchange ourselves, especially as leaders, when it comes to developing ourselves. We shortchange ourselves because we really don't find time to develop ourselves. This is a development for you right now. Take advantage of it. And so put your phone over there. And I also ask them, we do this together too. Let's pull up your IMs. Everybody go in and do not disturb. Because your IM can say in a meeting all day. We already know people are going to still IM you. So this time is sacred. It is for you. It is for us. And I want to make sure that we take advantage of it. And the best way, or the only way to do that, is for us to be uninterrupted. And so we can all be present in this session together. And then lastly, I go over how you want them to respond. So what I mean by that is, in the virtual environment, it's easy to overtalk one another, right? So do you want them to raise their hand? If you do, let them know that. Do you want them on mute? Me personally, I didn't. And the reason is because a couple of things. Number one, if your TV is on or your radio is on in the background, that can't happen because you're off of mute, right? But the other one is because I want to hear the ahas and the laughs at my little corny jokes. I want to hear that real time where it's happening. And that is going to also lend to the engagement. So I tell everybody, take your phone off of mute. And I also say, before you talk, say your name. So, because, we don't know everybody's voice in here, right? But that's going to help us remember your voice, and we know who's speaking. And it also tells everybody somebody is getting ready to say something. So say your name and then give your thoughts. So that's engagement, preparation, and then setting the stage.
Raquel, those are excellent tips for a lot of us who are trying to figure out this sort of virtual learning environment. So appreciate you sharing that based on your veteran experience. That's really helpful.
You're welcome.